think he's just turned it up now. Yeah. Yeah. I will. Andy, can you hear me at the back? Can you hear at the back? Yes. Would you mind just shutting those two doors, and we'll make a start. Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, I know it's been a long day, lots of discussions, lots of workshops. I'm sure there's lots of ideas. We're going to finish this at 4:25. We've got three very distinguished guests. I hope we're going to have a good final debate and then a finale to the day. Our focus is on why is educational attainment persistently poor in certain places. And to help me discuss that question, I have, first of all, sorry, my cards are all muddled up here. So first of all, I have Natalie. I know, but I have to tell them all lovely things about you. They're all, yeah, so Natalie Pereira, who's Chief Exec of the Education Policy Institute. She's come all the way up, literally, to be joining us with this session, and she did the session last week in London, so big thanks to Natalie. She leads an independent research organisation focused on education policy, and previously worked at the Department for Education, the Cabinet Office, and the Institute for Government. And at EPI, she has spearheaded research on educational inequalities, the attainment gap, and evidence-based reforms, and she is a frequent commentator on education policy. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you.
Next along, we have Alison Wolf. Sorry, I've got another long list of things to say on there. So, where have they gone? I knew this was going to happen. I've practiced this all day. So, oh, there they are. That's why they're at the bottom. Right. So, Baroness Alison Wolf of Dulwich. So I just call her Alison, you see, I didn't know the full time. So Baroness Wolf is the Sir Roy Griffiths Professor of Public Sector Management at King's College London and a crossbench peer in the House of Lords, a leading authority on education and skills policy. She authored the influential Wolf Report on Vocational Education in 2011, which, by the way, was the report that made me stay in further education, otherwise I'm not sure I would have done at that point in time. And contributed to the Augur Review on post-18 education. Baroness Wolf has advised on primary legislation, including the Skills and Post-16 Education Act 2022 and the Lifelong Learning Act 2023, and has played a key role in the development of specialist maths schools. She is recognised both here and internationally for her expertise in linking education skills and the economy. Big welcome to Alison. Thank you. And last but not least, I'm pleased to introduce Gillian Keegan. Gillian is a Conservative politician who served as the Secretary of State for Education between 2022 and 2024 and was the Member of Parliament for Chichester from 2017. Having left school at 16 to take up an apprenticeship, she later completed her degree while working and went on to build an international business career. She's been a long-standing advocate for apprenticeships and technical education, serving as the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills and leading initiatives such as degree apprenticeships, new institutes of technology and the UK's first BSL GCSE. Congratulations and thank you, Gillian. Right, so on our theme then, of why is educational attainment in some places persistently poor. I'm going to come to Natalie first. So simply, Natalie, from your research, what are the reasons why we have these persistently poor outcomes in specific areas?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So we've done a lot of work in the Education Policy Institute looking at educational underperformance, and predominantly we're focused on the disadvantaged gap as well. So that's the gap between children and young people eligible for the pupil premium and their peers. But we also look at it through other lenses of vulnerability and disadvantage, including by ethnicity, by SEND status, by looked after status, and of course by regional and local disadvantage gaps as well. And it will come as no surprise that we consistently find that outside of London and the South East, disadvantaged children in particular fare much worse than their peers when we look across a range of educational outcomes. But we also know that once we account for pupil demographics, i.e. their background, that those educational gaps become much smaller. And we know that poverty is one of the biggest drivers of educational outcomes. And we found that once we account for what we call persistent poverty, so that's children who have been on free school meals for at least 80% of their school lives. So by and large, they've never really been off free school meals, and so their family have pretty much always been in poverty. Once we account for that characteristic amongst young people, we do see quite different trends in the disadvantage gap across the country. We see some areas in the north, for example, Knowsley, which has a strong reputation, or well, a reputation for underperformance. We see actually their performance in terms of disadvantaged children's attainment improve. And we see other areas in the south, like Surrey and Wiltshire, actually their attainment and their disadvantage gaps looks worse once we account for persistent poverty. So it's really fair to say that poverty, and particularly depth and persistence of poverty, plays a huge role in regional inequalities. And this has been reinforced not just from the data that we analyse, but from qualitative research that we've done with regional leaders across the country as well. And we know that there are multiple ways in which poverty has an impact on children's ability to thrive. It can lead to hunger and malnutrition, as well as stressed parents, and therefore a home learning environment which is not always conducive to learning. And this was particularly evident during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw the disadvantage gap widen. That was in part, for the most part due to absence, but where children are not at school, they're often in a home environment where they don't have access to effective technology or a quiet place to study, or indeed the kind of cultural or social capital of more affluent parents. We also know that regional inequalities are operating against a backdrop of lower funding rates. So between 2010 and 2018, there was a real term cut to the schools budget. The introduction of the national funding formula was a welcome introduction to level up funding between London and the rest of the country. But again, that takes time for that to have an impact. And we also know that in areas outside of London and the South East, teacher recruitment and retention, particularly in important subjects like maths and physics, is much harder. And we found that in the most disadvantaged areas outside of London, only around 17% of physics teachers and 20% of maths teachers have a relevant degree. And then almost final point is that we know that there has also been real term cuts to wider children's services, including early intervention and young people services in the decade to 2020. That was around 20% per child in real terms. So what we're looking at is a picture of schools, particularly outside of London, having to operate against quite a different funding challenge, the kind of backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, and finding it difficult to recruit and retain teachers. And we found that when children do fall behind early on, it's very difficult for them to catch up. It's not impossible. There are a tiny handful of local authorities who have larger gaps in the early years and do then catch up, but that is the vast minority. For most local authorities, where they start with large disadvantage gaps, we see those trends perpetuated. So I'll stop there, but just a kind of key that kind of poverty and a lack of early intervention is likely playing a huge part in regional inequalities.
Okay, thank you. Gillian. want to respond?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. This is actually the first thing I've done since the election, and the reason I've done it is because, well, apart from a few TV things, is because this matters, social mobility matters. And what qualifies me to sit here is not the fact I was Secretary of State for Education, not the fact I was Apprenticeships and Skills Minister, not the fact I worked in businesses for 30 years and employed thousands of people all over the world. It's that I grew up in Knowsley. I went to one of the comprehensive schools that you were talking about, that literally failed children for decade after decade. And I 100% know exactly what the reasons are, because I've lived them and all my friends live them. And even though my social mobility story has taken me all over the world and to a very different place, my mum and dad still live in the same place where I grew up, lived from when I was 10 years old. Massive family there. They all still go to the same schools. So I have my own focus group, and I can see, I saw it. I think I'm the fourth, there's 4 generations of our family who have gone to these poor comprehensive schools. And you can see the outcomes for my aunts and uncles, for my generation, my cousins, and my cousins' kids now. So that's what qualifies me, and that's what really I care about, and that's why I actually went into politics in the first place, because I thought maybe I've got something less academic but more real in terms of, you know, having lived the journey. And it is all down to education, and it's not only the quality of education, but it's the culture of education. So the culture of education can differ, but really what that is every parent wants their kids to do well in life. It's just whether you believe education's a route to get there. Now, more and more people now are starting to believe that because they've seen more and more examples of it. And obviously that's one of the advantages of more working class kids going to university. But when I was growing up, that wasn't, because it hadn't been seen as a route to get on. There were other ways to get on. But then there's the quality of education. Now, there was 10 comprehensive schools in Knowsley. All of them were closed down. I went to one of those 10. And it was very difficult to do well because the quality of the leadership and the quality of the teaching, and that's the same in any organisation. So the academy system, the free schools, all the changes that we've made, we do now have 3 good schools in Knowsley. So for the first time ever, there's some good schools. And I went to one of them, which was the one I would be going to. It's right next to where my parents live, on the council estate where my grandparents lived. So I know that area very, very well. And it has good leadership now, and it is starting to make a difference. But unless you invest in making sure that you have the good leaders, and then how do you attract the teachers? How do you get, and we had a maths teacher there, and I saw him teaching. He had been trained in Shanghai. We talk about the Shanghai maths method. There he was in that school, giving a brilliant maths class that I wish I could have stayed for because it was amazing. So it is, we know what the answers are. The kids are not really massively different. Yes, there's more obstacles. Yes, there's more poverty. Yes, there's poorer housing in lots of cases. But yes, many generations and many different people have managed to overcome some aspects of that. So at the general level, if you give people the chance to have a decent education and early years, because that's why we brought in free childcare, to make sure that people were starting school ready for those that don't get that from their parents. But they are really the important factors. And they haven't changed for decades, and there's some small inkling of changes through, I think, the freeing up of the school leadership from all having to be under local authorities. And for the record, Knowsley local authority were rubbish at education, and their results, I think, probably proved that over many years. So that's my personal view.
Thank you.
Of why it's so entrenched.
So it's interesting, isn't it? It has to be possible to get better outcomes, because if we go back 30 years, I'm looking around the room, some of you weren't even born 30 years ago, but those of you who are my age will remember that then the worst place to go to school was London. And now it isn't.
100%.
London schools in the 80s and 90s were absolutely terrible, really bad. And it's completely different now. Your opportunities in life are much better growing up in London. So what are the factors? We've talked about a couple. We talked about school leadership, we talked about school organisation. But what seems to stand out for some of those London schools is a mixture of factors that combine together to get those good outcomes. So the nature of the community, aspiration, ambition, families sharing a culture with the school, So, Alison, if I move to you and then I'll broaden it out to Natalie and Gillian, who is best to respond to these challenges? Is it central government, local government, communities, families, schools, or what's the mixture? What's the magic mixture?
Okay, I don't think there's necessarily a magic mixture which will take us into sort of happy uplands everywhere. But I actually think all three are important. Central government has to set some basic parameters and accountability, but ultimately delivery is about families and kids and schools. And really picking up on what Natalie and Gillian have said, I don't want to deny for a moment that poverty makes it harder, but also, as you've said, actually English schools are doing significantly better across the board than they were 30 years ago. And I think we should not forget that, even though we should also be very aware of the big gaps. So I think the two core things are about the family and whether or not they see education as really worthwhile. Does truly encouraging your kids to do well at school and to work hard at school, is that something that actually seems worth the effort? And if it doesn't, that's actually always going to be a drag down. But it is also about the quality of the supply, and that's not something which is predestined. So just to start with this, I mean, there's a tendency now to go, oh, well, of course results are better in London. And it is perfectly true that in London it is not difficult to see that doing well at school has a payoff. Nonetheless, it's not very long ago that London schools were just awful. You know, when my kids were in primary school, London results were dire. And although that's quite a long time ago, it's not sort of the 19th century. So I think it's partly about people feeling that it's worthwhile. And that's not just about, you know, will I go to a university on the other side of the country, but understanding that not just getting results, but that actually having these skills really makes a difference to your life, and having that something which parents really believe does make a difference. And obviously that's related partly to the fact that, you know, why does London do well? Once the supply is quite good, you've got lots of job opportunities. You've also got a lot of very, very ambitious immigrant parents. But, you know, honestly, there are plenty of ambitious parents all over this country. And, you know, alongside the do you see the point of it, I do think the supply issue and the fact that you can have better or worse schools, which Gillian has pointed to, is absolutely critical. And I wouldn't dare sit in Manchester and say this school is amazing, that school is amazing, but I know Sheffield a bit better. And Sheffield has a couple of schools whose catchment areas are entirely not merely sort of working class, but very high levels of people who are outside the labour market. Their results are amazing. I mean, really amazing, like 97% GCSE pass rates, you know, EBAC averages. I mean, whether or not you believe in the EBAC, they've got 100% entry for it. And they are doing that, and they are getting huge demand, of course, for their places. And they're doing that because they've got inspired school leadership. And, you know, one of the other things is, I mean, Gillian, I don't know if this was true for you, but it's about the general quality of the school. It's also about, I think, the relationships between individual teachers and individual pupils. And if you look, for example, at the current cabinet, who are, many of them, quite rightly proud of the fact they came from working class families, difficult circumstances. Quite terrifying proportion of them then went to Oxbridge, never mind to university, but never mind. We've got some things where we still need to broaden things out. But nearly always there's a teacher there who was actually had a personal relationship. And again, clearly you can't do that across the board, but we have done it in a number of places, and I think we could do it in many more places. And partly, again, I think that's a combination of giving schools independence. I do believe very strongly in schools having a lot of autonomy, but also in having supportive local authorities and supportive central government. And perhaps I can just sort of finish quickly, since you mentioned the maths schools, because I think that's quite interesting. The maths schools, which I've been very involved with, partly because my own university was the first actually to sponsor one. They are state schools. They are basically small selective sixth form colleges is what they basically are. they put a huge amount of effort into accepting mathematically talented kids from diverse backgrounds, and also doing a huge amount of outreach during the GCSE years. And they've been phenomenally successful, and they also are, in areas where there is a maths school, it actually it isn't about you just take a few kids from elsewhere. It actually lifts interest in maths across the whole area, because we do outreach and the teachers go out and actually the kids go out as well. And so you get an increase in maths A-level take-up generally. And I think that's the sort of thing where what you need to start thinking about is the ecology of schools, about creating a school ecology which is varied and which is actually about responding to the way that the world is going and to the interests. And obviously maths is a particular area, but it's by no means the only one. And I think that this sort of varied ecology, which sort of captures people's interests, and some of the academies have done this in other areas, is absolutely critical. And you know, one of the things that really disappoints me about the current government is that I'm not, you know, they talk quite rightly about the gulfs between areas, but I think what we need is a very varied and quite specific set of policies to actually say to parents in areas where it isn't obvious that schools are offering something, that this is valuable, this is doable, you can get to this. And I hope that something like that will come out, because Secretary of State frequently talks about the need to absolutely rightly to reduce the gulf, and indeed for universities to step up. But I'm not sure that I see anything very much coming out of it. The maths school program's frozen. It seems to me you have to have some quite concrete policies and not just sort of wave your hands, bluntly.
It seems to me that one of the things we've learned a lot about is what we call pedagogy in education. So for those of you not specialists, that's the art and science of teaching and learning. How do people learn, and what the techniques are that are likely to make that be most effective in terms of maximising learning. I think we know a lot more about that than we did, and I think that cuts across a whole range of vision. We know a lot about leadership, we know quite a bit about governance and so forth. All the things you've described, we know a lot about the importance of parental involvement and ambition, aspiration. We know a lot about the discipline within a school environment, particularly given that we teach children in groups, and therefore the discipline becomes important partly because of that. So why is it then that we have so many examples where we try and take the kind of experience we've seen in London to the rest of the country, and apart from isolated examples, we see so many things fail? So we had the London Challenge and various other things in London. I know there's arguments over what made the bigger difference. But efforts to translate those into other areas, the Greater Manchester Challenge didn't work, for example. We've got some areas where academies individually have done well, but I've got my colleagues and friends from Blackpool here, but we've seen some of our schools repeatedly academised and re-academised, and still no significant difference in outcome. We've had opportunity areas. Those of you who are even older, you remember Education Action Zones, Excellence in Cities. These are all area-based approaches, and yet the same 30 places or so still persistently come out bottom. What is it then, given we now know so much more about the ingredients of success, what is it that needs to be done to make that difference? If I start with Gillian.
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognise that the London Challenge was very successful, but it was also the lowest hanging fruit. London has it, as soon as I went to London and I got off the train, I knew exactly why. There's a train system for a start. There's a tube system. You can see the skyscrapers. There were even ones that you could get into that you didn't need a qualification to enter. The city, the sort of whole sort of Essex, sort of Kent city boy thing, where you could earn fortunes. It was all there in front of you. I would imagine the reason it wasn't working beforehand is probably, again, poor local authorities, poor people responsible for education, and unleashing the leadership has turned things around. There's also demographic differences in London, lots more different ethnicities, a lot of which really value the culture of education. And you see that a lot from the Far East, from people who've come from those cultures, which you see much less in, you know, Knowsley, Blackpool, etc. You know, they are largely sort of white working class areas. So effectively you've got a different set of challenges. You don't have the transport systems, you don't have the jobs, you don't have the ecosystems. Some of them are coming to the cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle. They are all starting to really get a lot of the advantages of the levelling up, of the opportunity areas, of all of those things. Because again, they're slightly easier than Blackpool and Knowsley, which always come. Well, Knowsley's been the top for years, and I think Blackpool has been the second for all that time pretty much. So you know that there are different problems. And yet, the one thing I know is the kids are the same. And when we used to say that talent is everywhere and opportunity doesn't match that, you know, there's all these kind of slogans and people say stuff, but that meant so much to me. That really meant so much to me, because in 2 weeks' time I'll be going back to Knowsley. I'll be meeting a whole load of girls I went to school with, and you know, the outcomes are so different for so many of us, and we were all the same at school. There's not one single reason that I can think of why I've been successful and they were not successful. So that, and some of them have been successful as well. So that's the thing. And so if I think about it from a policy viewpoint, persistently, you need to not give up on the areas. If you believe in the kids, if you believe that in that saying, you won't give up. And I would never give up, because I really believed in it, because I'm from it. And it's me I'm talking about, and people like me, the next generation of me's. So, you know, you can't give up. You have to, it is more difficult to get maths teacher there. It is more difficult to get people to do things that are, you know, to get work experience. It is more difficult to be able to see the jobs right in front of you, apart from Jaguar Land Rover, that literally have a car in almost every school. But, you know, it is more difficult, but it isn't, that's why it's more important to do. So I would say, you know, the thing about everything is you always get the lowest hanging fruit, and then the next, and then the next. And these are the more entrenched ones. But the reason they're more entrenched is it's the harder thing to do. And the whole thing about leadership, and whether that's political leadership or school leadership or college leadership or university leadership, is if you think you're in leadership to do the easy things, don't bother. You don't need a leader. You only need leaders to do hard things. You only need leaders to tackle the most entrenched, most difficult, whether it's business problems or educational problems, or you know, school problems. So it really does get back to what do you really care about? And instead of admiring problems, and there's a whole ecosystem around deprivation and poverty in this country that sit and admire the problems whilst getting paid themselves. A whole ecosystem. So instead of admiring the problems and being satisfied with another generation, as I say, 4 generations in my family now, another generation that's not being able to fulfill their potential because of the opportunities they've been given, continue to really, really work at the problem and segment the problem, because there are solutions. Because if you believe in the kids and you believe in the families, you'll find the solution because you care enough.
Thank you. Let me just pick up that theme about the low-hanging fruit first,
Yeah.
the more difficult ones. So one of the things that strikes me about all of those areas, a common characteristic, is the low achievement of the children mirrors the low achievement of the parents. And I'll come to Gillian and Alison first, then to Natalie. So you are probably 2 of the most knowledgeable people in the country around adult skills. So how far are we using our adult skills money in that way that you described, Julian, of really strong leadership to try and fix those problems? Because it seems to me that we don't do a great job of working with those families around trying to improve their outcomes. Do you agree or disagree?
Social mobility for me means you get your chance at any point in your life. And that's why I was so keen to make sure that we had an apprenticeship system that's all ages. That's very unusual. Most countries don't do that. They just focus on young people. I was really keen because I know that there's people there in their 30s, 40s, 50s that didn't get the GCSEs. It's blighted their lives, and it doesn't need to, because they have got everything that they need really to be able to succeed in life, apart from, as my dad used to say, the bits of paper. So that's why I was very keen on that. But there is an adult education system, and Alison and I probably do have some agreement, and we didn't agree on everything, but we did agree on this. And I looked at the adult education system, and there's not a single adult that I know who doesn't have an education who would sign up to do those things. They were level 1, rubbish course after rubbish course, not linked to any kind of employment opportunity, not linked to anything that you could see. And if you're going to put your time in when you're an adult, when you've got kids, when you've got all kinds of things, you know, time is a premium. If you're going to put your time into doing something, you need to know that it's going to make a difference to your earnings. You know, it's really, really key. If you can get a better job, I'll earn this much. That's why there's a lot of apprentices who are doing, you know, and I've seen some wonderful stories where people have literally, you know, been cleaning nightclub toilets for years and then suddenly got the opportunity via an apprenticeship and were on the way to becoming paramedics, having done their English and maths in their 30s and 40s. It's just an amazing system. We should really treat it very preciously. I'm afraid I don't think it's understood as much in this current government as we really got it, and certainly I really got it, not only because I was an apprentice, but it's that link. As Alison's specialism, how do you get education and employment to really work closely together? You make them by taking the money off the employers and giving them the incentive to work with the education system to make it deliver what they need, not the education system talking to itself level one after level one of things that are not linked to the labour market. And therefore it's a bit in disrepute, I would say.
Thank you. Alison, do you agree?
Well, I think you should be answering your own question here, Alan, since you really deal with this on a daily basis. I agree. I think that our adult skills system has run into the sand, and I'm going to see that Natalie is, and this goes back to my original point, which is that
Apart from apprenticeships.
but we're talking about schools really here, in schools and formal education. And, you know, in terms of the original question, what does it take to get things in? Well, first of all, by the way, you do have to keep going, because one of the things about a school or a college, like any other institution, is that if you don't keep working at it, it sort of slides away. But going back to my original point about a really successful area, an area where education is going really, really well, where schools are mostly good, will be one in which the parents really recognise the importance of education, as well as one in which you've got really good supply. And I don't think that our adult education system encourages that belief among most people, because as Gillian says, and as you would say, what the system basically pushes colleges towards doing is getting the money out of the door on an endless merry-go-round of low-level courses. And it's interesting, in terms of my own experience in government, I think we made progress there was progress in a number of areas, which by the way, the current government is entirely supportive of both the things I'm going to talk about, so this is not me weighing into them again. The first of which I'm most proud, but it doesn't really speak to the lowest achieving, is the introduction of a much more flexible higher education support system through the lifelong learning entitlement. But that's obviously sort of university level courses, and we don't have anything like that for adults yet. But the other thing which, interestingly enough, the previous Conservative government got rid of was a total obsession with formal pieces of paper. And I think the other thing that I feel proud to have been associated with, even though they're not all perfect, a lot of them are not perfect, is the sort of the reintroduction into adult education of, under the guise of boot camps, things that were actually about teaching people in a concentrated way skills that were highly relevant to their local labour market. Now, I'm sure there are 101 ways in which it can be improved, but one of the things that's wrong with current adult education is it's still unbelievably tied up to the churning out of pieces of paper with a qualification attached. And that was, it sort of afflicted education, I think, back in the 90s, and was sort of cross-party, and the idea was that, you know, you would get accountability that way, and it's turned out to be a catastrophe because it becomes super bureaucratic and all the incentives are wrong. And it does seem to me that this is all of a piece. As I said, it's about creating an education ecology in an area which encourages people to feel that this is really tapped into the local labour market, the national labour market, their futures, their children's futures. And if if we are not going to, well, we will have the same conversation in 10 years, I'm sure, because there will always be the same things, but it does seem to me that if we are going to make progress, we have to address that adult bit. And then coming back to, why do you have 2 or 3 schools and not others? I mean, I think, again, it's because it's about giving freedom to heads, but it's also about, and I believe this passionately, about making sure that people are talking to each other and seeing what other people can do and being both inspired and to a certain extent shamed by what other people can do. Mm-hmm. And one of the things which I think the very best academy trusts do is exactly that. And it is a little bit of shaming as well as inspiring. And that seems to me something which, again, a really good local authority can and should do. And going back to London, I think that was one of the aspects of the London Challenge, that basically if you were a bad school, you were quite publicly shamed. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I'm going to come to Natalie for one last question, then I'm going to open it up for the last 10 minutes to questions from the floor. So on this theme about families in particular, so we've heard quite a lot about families and perhaps how we could deliver a different kind of adult learning to help families understand a bit more about what needs to be done in terms of children's outcomes. From your research, how do we explain the differences between poor families, so particularly around ethnicity? So take Chinese families. Chinese children on free school meals do better than anybody. They do better even than Chinese children who are not on free school meals. How do we explain those anomalies?
So I don't think they have kind of been captured and codified in a kind of data-driven, evidence-based way. But what we can kind of garner from what we know is that there's a different approach to education and attitudes and aspiration when it comes to education. We'll also remember we're looking at a subset of these ethnic groups. So we're looking at a subset of Chinese people, of Indian people, of Sri Lankan communities where I come from, that came to this country because they wanted a better life for themselves and their children. So there's a kind of natural selection there. They came to work for the NHS, for example. So we're not looking at the full range of families in India, Sri Lanka, except China, etc. So that's what I'd say to that. We do need to be a bit careful when we're making these comparisons. But going back to your question about why we haven't been able to replicate the success of London across the rest of the country, and demographic is definitely part of that. But we can't just sit back and say, well, we don't have enough Chinese, Indian, Sri Lankan people in the rest of the country, so we just have to accept that. That's not good enough. If we look at the IFS evidence from a few years ago, when they looked at the drivers of success in London, they also attributed it to higher funding rates and also to interventions, including the London Challenge that we talked about, and Teach First. What we can't do, and what I think is always tempting, particularly amongst politicians, is to say, well, Singapore does great in this and Estonia does great in that. Let's replicate that in this country. And you can't just do a copy and paste when we're talking about societies that are very nuanced and very complex. So if we're trying to replicate the success in London, we can't just cherry pick different things. We talked a bit about academies. They're not a silver bullet to success, but they can be forces for really positive change. I sit on the board of a national academy trust called LIFT. We run almost 60 schools across the country, many of them in disadvantaged and coastal communities as well. And we're seeing real progress in our primary schools in particular, because we have the strength and scale of a big academy trust where we're able to make the most out of our pooled funding. We invest that in high quality teaching and leadership and professional development, in a strong curriculum that's kind of consistent through primary and secondary. And we're also expanding our early years provision. So again, there's that seamless transition at key stages. So academisation is not a silver bullet, but it is one way in which we can develop the kind of scale that we need to start to think about how do we get change at the kind of scale that we saw in London.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got around about 8 minutes left. There's a taxi waiting outside to get people to their training time, so we're going to finish bang on 25 past. So we've probably got time for 2, maybe 3 questions. Is there anybody who'd like to go first? Yes, you put your hand up first.
Thank you very much. When you say about London's education being poor, are you including Bakers, Haberdashers, Asks, are you including Harrow? Are you including Hamlet? You know, are we talking about just state schools here, or are we also including these incredibly high-performing private schools? We don't reflect the school template of the Netherlands, for example, where we don't have public and private. We have one good quality education that is pulled out to all. Where's the differentiation? Why are we just focusing on state schools that are government funded? Why aren't we looking at the calibre that's being executed in our private schooling and public schooling systems within this?
Shall I deal with that question? So I think the reason why we focus on state schools is the majority of people don't go to private schools. So whilst they clearly do have some good outcomes, not all of them do. Some of them have very good outcomes, but in terms of widening opportunity, we're not able to widen opportunity by getting more people to go to private schools because that's not within our gift, whereas driving up the standard of the state sector, I think, is...
The example of the Netherlands is a broadband system. You wouldn't have one if you're there. On top of that, London's schools, people, places like Bacon's and Haberdashers, you know, if you look at the St Albans schooling system, they've always been exemplary. So we don't need to have the differentiation, do we? We could be like the Netherlands. I know you're saying let's not draw a comparison, but why not?
Well, I think the key issue here is that it might be true that there's been some schools that have always been exemplary, but the level of London schools, of state schools in the 80s and 90s was really poor, now it's really good. So the question...
I remember it really clearly, but still it doesn't answer the question, why aren't we looking at templates like the Netherlands?
Because we're pro-choice in this country, so people have a choice about whether they want to send their children to one school or another. We don't have a sort of one-size-fits-all system. And, you know, we may end up with that, but just so you know, on private schools, there's 2,500 private schools. Most people couldn't mention more than 20 of them. Everybody's obsessed with the ones that are the big ones, at Eton or whatever. When you look into them, the vast majority of them are, there's faith schools, there's small primary schools, there's a lot of special educational needs schools, and that's what the makeup of the choice that parents get. So that's why we don't have one single system. And, you know, let's also be honest, for the 7% that go, if any, they're saving basically the state £7,000. So if you had to pay for all of that as well, then you would probably find the school budgets would be quite squeezed.
We move on.
Yes.
Okay, we'll move on. I think you've had your hand up. Can we just take the one question at a time? Thank you. Next person.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting. Gillian, you said about being able to see the skyscrapers, and Alison, you said about like encouraging parents and showing them the value about engaging in education. What more do you think we should be doing with that, particularly in terms of when we're looking at changing labour markets in the future and stuff like that? How can we kind of make people trust that education is worth it and that they should be pushing their kids?
Okay, well, I don't think there's talk about silver bullets, there is no silver bullet. And what I think is absolutely the case is that it's obviously harder if you as an adult parent live in an area where there is not the visible explosion of opportunities that there has been in the southeast. As I sort of said, of course, you know, 150 years ago, all the explosions and opportunities were up here, and the southeast was becalmed and declining. So, but I do actually think that the issue that Alan raised is absolutely critical. Now, we do know, and Natalie probably knows more about the research than I do, that sort of intensive schemes that bring parents into schools and so on are helpful. But I actually think that in terms of really making parents understand that education is worth it, it is also about them having had some experience of this themselves, that actually, even if their own education when they went to school was rubbish or they think it didn't matter, that if they do feel that there are things that they have learned or could learn as adults, and if we can improve the opportunities there, that has a huge ripple effect. And I'm actually reminded of I don't know if anybody from Public First is here. I remember looking at, way back, I remember being allowed to sit in on a focus group that Public First ran, actually talking to adults about what they wanted. And these were people sort of in their mid-30s. And these were not, these were not people who were in any sense total failures in life, but they were all people who'd left school at 16 or 17 and hadn't made Gillian's career. And a lot of what they felt they wanted was a chance to reskill in some quite specific ways and to shift and actually learn things and do things that they hadn't had the chance to do. They didn't go, oh, I wish I'd gone to university at all, actually, but what they felt was that as we all tend to, that they were sort of stuck on lines. And I do think that it's a lot of that. So I actually think that creating a country in which almost all parents genuinely believe that, and as I do, by the way, that education is important, and it's not about every child suddenly becoming a cabinet minister or a graduate engineer, but it's about being able to have a better life, a life which has more opportunities. I actually think fixing adult education is probably as important as anything else.
Can I just add two things? First of all, role models go a long way. And if you just see one that does it, then people would say, and my mum would say, people will talk about you on the bus in Knowsley now saying, well, there was a girl that went to that school, not about my cabinet career, they couldn't give a toss about that, probably because I was conservative, but about my business career, because that was linked to money. But people do change also, and I have a lot of faith in this. So maths A-level, when I was the education secretary, I think it was like the 5th or 8th most popular A-level. And we started to link and communicate and say, if you do well in maths, you'll earn more. And it's as simple as that. People are very, very motivated by being able to earn. And that's why I'm a big fan of, now we have the data, and I was a big fan of putting apprenticeships on UCAS, which is what I did, so you've got more choice and you can see all the choices as well as the university, different routes to the same places, but also what you'll earn likely from various degrees. Now, it doesn't mean you should only do various degrees, just so you are fully informed when you're making your choice. And I think those kind of things, people are very rational, and now it's the number one A-level is maths. The number one in a very short period of time, because people think if I do that, I'll earn more. People are still very rational.
Thank you. I know somebody's stealing the bottles behind us. I
thought that was your recycling, no?
I'm going to ask Natalie to come in one last comment. We can take your question perhaps at the end after, when people have gone. So, Natalie, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, just on that, I think it is a question of aspiration and all of the things that Alison and Gillian have talked about. But two other points I'd make. One is that there needs to be, I think, a greater commitment by government, by regions and by business to actually make available employment opportunities outside of London. So companies need to be based there, they need to take the plunge, and also more public services outside of London as well. And then I think the thing we haven't really talked about in terms of aspiration is that we know that enrichment can play a really positive role in building aspiration and building cultural capital and opportunity. Just by having one minibus in one of my primary schools that I spoke about, the head teacher there said that could be transformative in getting children out of this very rural community in the West Midlands and into seeing parts of Birmingham that they wouldn't normally see.
Right. Well, look, thank you very much, all of you. On that note, I think a very positive note. We'll wrap up. Can you just join me in a very warm round of applause for our three guests? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know you've got a taxi to get, so if you could wait 30 seconds, I'm just going to do some closing remarks and then we're going to wrap up. But thank you very much, all of you.
We weren't able to take more questions.
Yes,
so,
okay.
But thank you very much for being such a great audience.
Right. Okay.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Thank you. Thank you. I think they can take it off as you go out, yeah. Great, thank you very much, thank you. Okay, so quite a long day, quite a lot to think about. At both this event and the London event, we've been particularly keen that a symposium should be about an exchange of ideas. It should be quite challenging. So I hope people are going to go away with some sense that actually they've confirmed some things that they thought, but maybe they've got some things to think about which they didn't have before. I think one thing that probably binds people together in the room is a sense that social mobility is important. I would just remind you that not everybody agrees with you. And so the onus is on us to say, actually, how do we make that case? And do we make that case by being really clear about some of the big issues that we've talked about? We've particularly pitched in strongly on how do you make it relevant? How do you make it relevant to the current challenges we see? And we've presented some arguments around that. I think we've also encouraged others to bring some things to the table. So I hope you've had a chance to hear the wider range of voices around social mobility, not just ours, and that you've enjoyed that interchange of ideas and you go away stronger because of it and more able to make your case. A big thank you to everybody who's been involved in the fringe events and the workshops, all the people that have attended and all the people that organise them. So Public First, the Young Foundation, IPPR and the Northern Powerhouse. They've all played a really important role in making sure we have a rich understanding of the wider debates around social mobility, and they've encouraged us to foster some meaningful dialogue, I hope. A special thank you to the venue for so graciously hosting us and making it an extra special occasion, a rather grand place. It was the Freemasons Hall. That's kind of got a social mobility connection of an odd kind. Just they did it in a different way to the way we prefer, but I think the grandeur of the premises is certainly fitting. And also a very big thank you to my fellow commissioners, not all of them here now, but they've all been here throughout the day at different times, who's certainly helping us develop the agenda for the Commission in a very robust way. And to the Social Mobility Commission team, who you'll have seen around, I think they have, is it grey lanyards today? Yeah, grey lanyards today, who have been instrumental in pulling this together, and I hope making it a very friendly, welcoming event for all of you. So, and finally, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your engagement, your commitment, your willingness to get involved in debate and discussion, for the work you do when you go back in your organisations. Today I think we've heard some really compelling insights into the wider issues around social mobility. The onus is on us to make this count. So have a safe journey home, and thank you very much indeed.